Hello, class. It is Sunday night because I don't know how days pass anymore, apparently. Sorry about that. You'll still get extra credit if you did the responses for this week. Um, I have been thinking about the question that was posed in class um, by me, but that you each addressed in your videos, and that is is a surprise to me that I am now kind of thinking about it in a way that I haven't before. And I don't know. I think, like, maybe again, we're falling into Plato's trap that he wants his book to be uh, rereadable, right? He wants his book to be ambiguous and to hold up to multiple readings because he doesn't want anyone to be able to um, completely feel as if they understand it or completely feel as if they should follow in his or Socrates's footsteps. And that's one like really great thing about Plato as a student, right? Like he as like the one of what, like three or four like really devoted followers of Socrates, his devotion is such that he recognizes that devotion can be dangerous, and he write a whole speech about it. Um, a whole speech in which Alcibiades comes in and accuses Socrates of being unerotic. And in class, we kind of, or I kind of, and seemed like everybody agreed that Erixymachus was also coming off as pretty unerotic. I mean, talked about the body, and Socrates talks somewhat about the body, but mostly about the mind, right? He talks about philosophy, and there's something to be said about that, I think. The mind body problem, as well as the tragedy comedy thing. Uh, and in that way, I think that they're related in terms of like, here are two men, one's talking about like bodily fluids and functions being in harmony, and art and music, and but never mentions anything to do with sex or sexuality or relationships between people. And then you've got Socrates, who gives his whole speech basically as a in praise of philosophy, which is to say, in praise of Socrates, um, just as Erixymachus is in praise of uh, doctors and makers and poets, and I mean, he's putting himself in the same category as those other makers, which he's saying that he's an artist, and we can. I mean, I don't know what the great tragedian or great comedian of the time would have thought of that. Maybe they would have not agreed so much. But that's the claim Eriximachus is making. He, it's also, I think we have to trouble more over why Eriximachus is in charge of the party and in charge of the speeches, and why everyone agrees to that when, like, you've got some of the great men of their time or whatever, right? Like the most famous people of their time. Um, And the only one who kind of steamrolls over him a little bit is Alcibiades, who comes in at the end, right before he's going off to the Sicilian expedition, which will fail, and right before he's accused of defacing the statues, um, and ends up kind of being ousted from Athens. Um, that timing is interesting. Like, he, in that time, with that timing in mind, he's praising Socrates. Um, and his one complaint about Socrates is that he's not responding to Alcibiades' eros. and then he's going to go off to war, a war that Athens has pinned its hopes on, and Athens has pinned its hopes on him, and the mission's going to fail. Uh, he's seen as a, you know, enemy number one after that. And people are blaming Socrates, right? People blame Socrates for his corruption, for like the loss of the Alcibiades that they had put so much faith in. Um, right? The people's claim is that Socrates has corrupted the desire of Alcibiades. And you can read his speech about in praise of Socrates as a kind of second trial of Socrates, or at least this is how it's been read in the past, that Plato is also putting Socrates on trial and defending him, and Alcibiades is obviously the key witness, right? And Aristophanes, who is the great accuser, um, in Clouds, where he makes fun of Socrates. And in this version, in Plato's version, right, the Symposium, it's clear that if Alcibiades is corrupted, it's not so much by Socrates' desire. Socrates does not fulfill Alcibiades' desire, and so Alcibiades, I don't know, he comes off not that great, right? I think we agreed on that. He comes off as kind of like a kind of whiny, unrequited love teenager or something. And there's something, I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. I think we have to compare that to like the comedic interruption, right? Alcibiades is is very comedic. He's comic relief. He comes in, he destroys the order of the day, which is giving these speeches. Um, he destroys it by invoking Socrates, and says that he'll tell the truth about Socrates, and Socrates demands that he does tell the truth, as long as it's true. And then from there, the party devolves into drinking, and the speaker, the person who witnessed, the witness falls asleep. And when he wakes up briefly, he sees Socrates talking to Aristophanes and Agathon, and playing the matchmaker, bringing tragedy and comedy together. And Sarah's right to say, well, right, that Plato changes basically um, how plays work in Athens, and Aristotle kind of comes in and really, Aristotle, Plato's student, um, really changes how things are done. Uh, Plato can be said kind of to unite tragedy and comedy, and he does so in this book, right? And his student Aristotle um, takes comedy and tragedy out of the hands of the gods and puts it in the hands of the fatal flaw or whatever that you probably hear a lot about in high school and earlier, right? The tragedy being the kind of downfall of the human with a fatal flaw. That's an Aristotelian idea that is supposed to give agency to humans rather than um, to the gods, right? If you have pure comedy or pure tragedy, a lot of that is generated um, by gods, by fate, right? Fate in the form of gods, and Aristotle goes on to say, all right, it's much more tragic, especially because he's especially talking about tragedy if the person causes his own tragedy, if it's not like kind of God given God uh, godly, like coming from from an outside source. If we do it to ourselves, that's the ultimate tragedy. The That's kind of a, I mean, maybe that connects in some way to what I want to think about, which is the mind body separation. The Greeks um, were a little closer on the mind body separation. We saw that in Carson, where the soul is breath, basically, and so it is a kind of byproduct of the body, right? The body breathes, the breath is the soul, and that's both kind of like metaphorical and literal. Um, the real kind of the major separation comes um, with Descartes in European history, on the European side at least, with I think, therefore I am. Um, and then we've got kind of dualism, which is splitting humans into, on one side, the mind or the soul, and one side, the body, and as if they're two separate things. Um, Plato in this book seems to be drawing them together. I guess that's how I'm making sense of Erixymachus and Socrates together. They're both talking about balance. Uh, Erixymachus is talking about opposites and um, the kind of reach that goes from one side to the other, or the other side to the other, and then kind of Socrates is talking about what happens in the middle while they're reaching from either side, and so they're both talking about the reach. They're both accused of being unerotic, or can be read as being unerotic. Yet Socrates says he knows Eros more than anything, or the one thing he knows is Eros, but also the one thing he knows is that he doesn't know anything. Um, and Erixymachus has taken over the position of authority on love at this party in which you've got kind of the great speakers of Athens at the time. And so there's some kind of something going on there, I think, too, right? Like they all cede to Erixymachus except for Alcibiades. And he balances the speeches and the people at the party um, as well as he can, right? He plays doctor in the organization of the party and the speeches. Um, Socrates plays his usual role, which is refuter slash the jerk nobody wants around. Um, Party pooper. Party pooper is probably as accurate as you can get in like a short name. Socrates plays a party pooper, and Erixymachus plays the party organizer. So they're opposed in that way too. So there's all these different like oppositions going on between them. You know, body and mind, party organizer, party pooper. Um, you've got kind of medicine and the arts on one side and philosophy on the other. Um, and if I'm thinking about what Sarah's saying about like philosophy, because of course Socrates is thinking philosophy does all of this, right? It brings all of those things together in the kind of ideal form is philosophy. I mean, that's why he gives his speech about philosophy, which is Eros, and Eros, which is philosophy. And on the other side of that, we've got the thing that Plato is worried about, right? Which is art, music, but especially kind of tragedy and comedy as dangerous threats because they produce errors without refutation, right? They encourage desire from the audience, and they encourage the kind of devotion that Alcibiades has for Socrates, and which Plato doesn't want anyone to have for him. So what you've got then is Plato's writing. Maybe we have to go back to the idea of reading this as a novel, um, as Plato's poetry, as Plato's answer to poets. Um, what is good poetry? It's the mix of tragedy and comedy. It's the mix of art and philosophy. Um, I think that's where they've got to come together. I think Plato's a good enough writer here, and like a conscious enough writer, conscientious enough writer, intentional enough writer that we can assume that everything that he's putting in there is for a pretty determined reason, right? So like ending in comedy and tragedy is not kind of like, oh, where do I end? I'll just, wrap it up like this. Um, it's really important as an ending. And the Greek plays were very, the endings mattered a lot. Telios. Um, to how you're supposed to interpret the entire thing. I guess what I'm saying is maybe Plato wants philosophy to have more art in it and art to have more philosophy in it. And this is the way of doing that. And he thinks those are linked to arrows. I mean, maybe that's the most interesting thing, is that he thinks the way to link those two things, art and philosophy and art, is eros. His desire not only of the body but of the mind, and that when they're working badly, art encourages a kind of giving up of the intellect. Plato would say maybe giving up the intellect for a kind of like physical reaction to the text. It's one of the things we love about art, right? But Plato is saying, right, you kind of lose your own ability to refute the art because of eros. And in philosophy, when it goes wrong, it doesn't have the art in it. Uh, it's just kind of like speeches by rote. It's rhetoric. I mean, to use it in the kind of pejorative sense um, that Plato seems to be kind of working with here, when he's kind of putting very rhetorical speeches according to like rhetorical forms into the mouths of Agathon and um, Pausanias and Phaedrus. These are like pretty common forms of rhetoric. And what philosophy is without art is perhaps that's rhetoric. Without arrows, it's rhetoric. So I don't know. Like that's where I ended up in this mess. Uh, you know, still living in the pandemic and trying to like do my best to feel alive when the world is not very encouraging of that feeling. So I'm really looking forward to talking about Lord, and I hope that you're enjoying the speeches, and we will talk on Tuesday. Sorry for this mess of a week / semester / life. Bye.